everyone, and welcome to our LP Research Workshop 10, which is our final research workshop for the academic year. Today we are going to talk about using generative AI for legal research. So this is obviously a hot topic. These AI tools were introduced within Lexis and Westlaw just last year. And this year we've seen already the second iteration of both of those tools from Westlaw and Lexis respectively. And so we'll talk about what those tools look like, as well as the use of AI within firms at present, some of the professional ethical responsibilities, etc. So let's get started. So first, if you are not familiar with generative AI or that specific term, what's meant by that is it's a branch of AI, right, that it's a tool that takes information or training data that the tool has been fed, and then it generates something new and original. And that something new and original that's generated is provided to you in response to the query that you've given it. Okay, so we'll talk about the importance of structuring your prompt in an effective way so that you can yield an effective response. But that's what we mean when we talk about generative AI tools, right? Taking existing information and then pulling it together to generate a new answer that is, again, responsive to the question that you are asking. So I'd like to highlight this particular study on the use of generative AI. To preface this survey was conducted amongst larger firms. Again, this is coming from last year, so 2024. So these numbers have only grown, right? So you see the average number of lawyers that have used these tools personally or professionally is at 75%. Okay, so that's substantial. Then you can see, again, beginning of last year, the firms who had purchased legal AI were already at 36%. So that's pretty substantial with these tools being introduced just last year. And then the firm using generative AI for legal matters. So actually starting to incorporate these tools into their everyday tasks for use by their attorneys, already at 37%. And again, this is last year, so those numbers have only grown. So this is to illustrate the use of these tools in law practice is substantial already and will only continue to grow. Now, even for those firms who are saying, no, we don't want our attorneys using these tools, these firms are still weighing and considering this decision, right? So that you can see an average of 60% of larger firms have developed, drafted, shared with their employees actual policies regarding the use of these tools for client matters at the firm. How are these lawyers using these tools? So you'll see here that the topmost priority, the tasks that are being performed through the use of these tools, the topmost use is legal research, right? So we're seeing a lot of weight afforded to legal research in terms of the tasks that are being conducted with these tools. You can also see some others, summarization of documents, that could be case law, that could be other things depending on what tool you're using. Drafting documents is helpful, right? Analyzing contract or just analyzing the work that you've put together already. We'll see some of those tools on Lexis and Westlaw. But this is how we're seeing these tools play out so far. This is how we're seeing attorneys use these tools at present. So, of course, law firms have hesitations, right? In terms of those firms that are hesitant to adopt some of these tools, a huge reason is trustworthiness, right? Are the tools reliable? Are they accurate, right? There's also a major concern with hallucinated information. So we'll talk more about these cases where these generative AI tools have produced fake cases that attorneys are submitting as work product. That's a huge concern, right? Is the legal information that we're being provided from these tools, does it actually exist? And is it still good law as well, right? So security or confidentiality concerns, right? There's a lot of concerns with respect to why firms are holding out at present. Of course, there are benefits as well as risks with the use of these tools, right? So super helpful if you are just wanting to get a starting point for your research, right? You want to get some sources that you can start to use at the beginning stages of your research. You want to use it for, again, the initial stages of your document drafting processes, right? Super helpful to ensure that you're being efficient with your time, reviewing documentation that you've put together already. Hey, look at this. What am I missing here? Are these the proper ways to lay this out in terms of the legalese that's used, etc., right? And then also breaking down complex concepts. So you've got all these sources, right? How do you put them together in a way that makes sense? You can ask these tools to do that for you in order to strengthen your comprehension, right? Risks, right? If the lack of contextual understanding, if the tool doesn't have the context, if you haven't given it that context, then it's not going to produce the type of result that you're wanting, right? So you need to provide sufficient context. And again, we'll talk about how to best do that. Information bias, right? The information that is being used and inputted into these tools will only be as good as that information, right? So if that information is biased, then some of the results are going to also be biased, right? So the strength of the tool depends on the information that it's being fed. There's, of course, ethical concerns, security, confidentiality, right? Are our attorneys becoming too reliant on these tools? The tools are evolving rapidly, right? As I said, we've already seen 2 iterations. We've moved from Lex's AI Plus Assistant to now Lex's Plus Protege. We moved from last year Westlaw Practical Law AI to now Westlaw Co-Counsel as their newer AI tool. And so we're seeing lots of change. So it can be hard to stay up to date on how the tools work and what their capabilities are. Right? Again, it's going to depend on where your firm stands, right? Does your firm allow the use of these tools? Don't rely on these tools to ensure that you've got everything that you need, right? They may produce some relevant sources and miss others that are really important for your work. And then again, the sources may not necessarily be up to date. So with ChatGPT, for example, last year it was only, I think maybe it was going up to 2019, I want to say, but it wasn't pulling recent sources or information. So it couldn't really give you answers as to more recent questions, right? This is a study that was published this year. Just builds on that a little bit. And the attorneys were asked, where do these tools help you most effectively? And then where do they help you ineffectively, right? So we can see routine tasks, right? That's where the value is going to come from with respect to law practice. Creating written content that you can work from, analyzing data or work product that you've put together yourself, right? And then where it falls short, privacy and security, which we've mentioned, right? Are the results accurate? Are they completely fake or hallucinated cases? Are our attorneys becoming too dependent on these tools, right? That's a concern as well. There are, as we said, significant professional ethical considerations, right? So in thinking about the lawyer's duties, the lawyer's duty of tech competence is a big one that comes into play here. So if you're not familiar with that, It is published via Texas Disciplinary Rule 1.01, and it requires lawyers to become and remain proficient and competent in the practice of law. And then you can see the relevant terminology here, including the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology. And of course, AI falls under that umbrella, right? So this duty of tech competence requires lawyers to stay abreast of these changes, right? What are these tools? What do they look like? How do they operate? Do you understand the basic functionality? Do you understand the extent to which they can be trusted or cannot be trusted, right? Are they effective? Are they not, right? Gaining an understanding of these tools in order to be able to answer those questions. So, some examples of where the lawyer's professional ethical duties were violated. The example last year was the Avianca Airlines case. You may have heard of that, where there were some attorneys representing Avianca Airlines. They had used ChatGPT to put together their work product before submitting it to the court, and they did not verify the cases that had been given to them by way of ChatGPT. And it turns out those cases were not real. So, unfortunately, since that time, we've seen more and more and more examples of lawyers doing the same thing. So you can see this example is from just last month in February. Attorneys from Morgan & Morgan, right, they had submitted to the court work products that contained 8 non-existent cases, right? Those cases were hallucinated via ChatGPT, right? And you can see also they ultimately faced disciplinary action and were ordered to pay a sanction of $5,000. And those sanctions we're seeing varying amounts, right? But you don't want this to be you, right? You do not. Again, it is amazing to me how many of these stories we're starting to see. It feels like every other week we're getting a new one. So it is interesting, but you do not want to be one of those lawyers, right? Here's another recent one, also from February, and I thought this language was interesting. Why is not citing fake cases so hard, right? It shouldn't be that hard. You should, if you're going to use these tools as a starting point, you have to go through and make sure that the case is indeed a real case, that the citation is an accurate citation, that the case is actually saying what the tool is telling you that it's saying, right? That the law is still good law, right? And this extends not just to the attorney who is pulling the cases or pulling the response from ChatGPT or Protege or co-counsel, whatever tool it is that you're using, right? If you, as a junior attorney, are using this tool and then it's passed off to a more senior attorney, that more senior attorney also has a responsibility to review that work, knowing that it has been generated via these tools, right? So they need to do the same thing, where they're ensuring that those cases are real and that they remain good law, etc. Now, we are also seeing changes within the courts, within court processes and practices with respect to the use of these tools. There are multiple examples. This example from the Northern District Amarillo Division, again, just one example, but the reason I've used this example is because this is the most popular language that we're seeing in terms of the mandatory certifications. So the court is saying you have to submit this certification, right, to the court. And it says one of two things. It says, 1, I have not used these tools whatsoever, or 2, I have used these tools, right? And you can see the language. They've been checked for accuracy by a human being, right, before being submitted to the court. And so again, we're seeing various language for these certifications, but this is what we've seen most frequently in Texas, and this is the more popular language that we're seeing across jurisdictions within these new mandatory certifications. There are, of course, a host of cost considerations that firms need to be thinking about when they're purchasing and adopting these tools for use, right? So not just the actual cost of the tool, but what is it going to cost to train their attorneys to use the tool? How are you going to deal with security, confidentiality issues? What are the costs related to those concerns? Does the firm need to hire AI experts or consultants to ensure that the attorneys remain informed and can indeed meet that duty of tech competence, right? There are a whole host of other cost considerations that should be looked at by firms. In addition to those cost considerations, there are a host of intellectual property implications, right? So who owns the content, right? Are these copyrighted materials? Thinking about fair use, trademark, right? Again, a whole list here that may come into play when we're looking at the use of these tools. An example last year was, this is to preface, this example, again, is an example of something we're seeing multiple times over, but we're seeing copyright infringement suits, okay? So last year, the big example was the New York Times suing OpenAI, right, ChatGPT, because ChatGPT had used information that it pulled from the New York Times, right? So the same thing is going on here. This is just a newer copyright infringement suit, and it's this time against, interestingly, involving New York Times again, Financial Times, Newsday, Politico, Vox Media. There were a number of plaintiffs that signed on. So we're seeing, again, more and more of these copyright infringement suits. And then we're also seeing, you can see here, 14 major publishers signed on as plaintiffs, right? So this particular case was against Cohere Incorporated, which is similar to ChatGPT, but a Canadian tool. But again, we're just seeing more and more of these cases play out, which highlights those intellectual property implications. Now, we've talked about the information that is being inputted into these tools, and we noted that the tools are only as good as the information that is fed into them, right? So that information is what we're referencing when we use the term training data, right? That is the data, the information that is being inputted into the tool in order for the tool to use that information to later generate a response in response to your individual query, right? So that's really the takeaway here is, again, the tool is only as good as the information that it's building from, right? A lot of times you are not going to know where that information is coming from, right? The information that's being put into these tools, who published that information? Where does it come from? Is it trustworthy, right? And so this further highlights the importance of verifying this information on your own. Again, something else we already sort of touched on was the importance of prompt engineering, right? The importance of effectively designing inputs, right, into these tools that produce the type of output or response that you want, that you need, that you're looking for, right? So the results that you get are going to be effective only if you have provided the tool an effective prompt. You have engineered the prompt in an effective way, right? So that's what we mean when we say prompt engineering. That is, again, very important in order to get the types of results that you're wanting, right? So here are some general tips, right? Start with a clear question. You want to tell it all the information that you have. What's the jurisdiction? What's the time frame, right? What do you need? What are you seeking? Provided the context, right? We talked about contextual understanding. Maybe you need to use natural language in addition to legal terminology, right? Asking follow-up questions. your follow-up prompts are going to be just as important, right? So these are effective, just general tips for building effective prompts, right? Now, another change we've seen recently through Lexis and Westlaw both is they have now published some of their own tips for using their Lexis plus AI and Protege tools in this instance, right? Telling you, hey, give us the jurisdiction, the parties, the key terms, the points of law, and then you can see the list there of other things that it wants you to provide in order for it to give you the best possible answer, right? And then same thing with Westlaw. So there are some tips coming from Westlaw, right? Even tells you we want your query to be approximately 1 to 2 sentences long, right? Don't overwhelm us. And this advice is going to differ by tool, right? Some tools may want you to provide a lot of context and maybe much more than 1 to 2 sentences. But in terms of the prompt engineering advice we're getting here from Westlaw, again, we're saying, okay, it wants 1 to 2 sentence request, right? Make sure you provide the facts, and then it gives you some examples of what your initial query might have looked like, right? What are the defenses to a securities fraud claim? And then you see how that query was expanded, right? How did you provide additional context? You can see they've mentioned specific rules, right? They mentioned Securities Exchange Act sections and rules, right? And then they expanded on the question. Then it gave some more context. The company claims it didn't know this, right? So this provides additional context and will help the tool to produce a more effective response that is tailored to your needs. So we'll look at this in just a moment, but when we look to Lexis, we'll see 4 major things or tasks, capabilities that the tool can do for us, that our Protege tool can do for us. So we can ask a legal question. Okay, so we'll look at that. We can ask it to draft a document, memo, brief, etc., right? A number of various forms of legal documentation. We can ask it to summarize case law. So on Lexis at present, that summarization tool is limited to summarizing case law and not other types of legal information. You could also upload your own documents, your own work product, and ask it to review that, right? Is this information effective? Is the organization effective? Do I have everything I need here? Am I missing important clauses, et cetera, right? And that can be for memos, briefs, contracts, again, all different types of legal documentation that you may have put together. Same thing on Westlaw. So now we're looking at these major tasks or capabilities that are provided through co-counsel. Okay, so you can see research, right? So same thing, just like on Lexis. Ask it a legal question. Summarize. Their summarization tool expands a bit further. So not only will it summarize case law for you, it will also summarize additional types of legal information, right? So expanding beyond case law, that is one difference between the two. Review documentation, right? Again, uploading your previous work product to get feedback on it, and then asking it to help you with drafts. So again, this is a starting point, right? You may use it as to help you with an email or memo, right? Whatever it is, but you're using that as a starting point and then working from that. So let's take a look at some of these tools on both Lexis and Westlaw. So we'll start with Lexis. We're on our main page here that you've become familiar with over the course of this academic year, right? So there are a couple ways to get to this tool. You can click on Protege at top right. If I do that, I see this tool on the right, and it's kind of small, right? So you can use it that way. You can also find it on the left here, and that I think is more helpful just because you can see it's much larger, right? You can see, you can just see better in order to, when using the tool, right? Okay, so we looked at these 4 capabilities already, right? So let's ask a question. Let's ask this question. How does Florida define residency for tax purposes? Just as an example. You're going to want to make sure to always specify your jurisdiction, okay? So I'm going to do that. Specified my jurisdiction. Content, I want all content, okay? So now I'm going to enter my question. And it may take a little bit for us to receive the response. It's taking quite some time. Okay, here we go. So now we can see an initial response, right? So we're seeing references to case law at top. We're seeing references to statutory law, right? If we scroll down, we see more content. So that could include codified law, right? We've got a Florida statutory code section here. We've got some case law as well. You can view related material, and that will take us to even more sources that we can look to, right? Cases, statutes, practical guidance, treatises, right? Administrative code. So we've got references to secondary sources as well, right? So this is, again, this is a helpful starting point, right? You're not going to just rely on this produced response, but it is helpful as a starting point. So generate a draft is our next tool. So I'm going to go to new conversation at left, and I'm going to ask it to generate a draft. Okay, so I'm going to ask it to draft deposition questions. Okay, so it's going to take a minute. And what it's going to do, it's going to tell me that I need to answer information that's relative to my client, right? It needs subjective information and in order to be able to provide us an applicable response, right? So it needs to know the fact pattern. What's the practice area? What's the cause of action? What's the jurisdiction, right? So you need to provide those things in order for it to do its job, right? So now I'm going to go to the summarization tool. I'm just going to click on a case, and you can see when I press enter at bottom, it's going to summarize the case for me, which is helpful. But again, the Lexis tool is limited to the summarization of case law and not other types of legal documentation at present. Okay, the last one I wanted to point to is documentation, right? And you can see here that you would simply upload your document to ask the tool to review it and provide feedback and recommendations for you. What we see on Westlaw is similar. We see our co-counsel link at top right here. If we click on this link, this first topmost link, if we click here, it takes us to this older layout, right? This was the initial layout introduced last year. But you can see from there, again, those 4 main tasks and capabilities are the same, right? That's what we saw on those previous slides. But you can also see, if you click there, these 4 main tasks, asking a research question, AI-assisted research, drafting correspondence. Westlaw has sought to kind of highlight these tools for different purposes, right? So not only do they have the summarization tool linked or review documents linked, but they show you that these tools can be used for legal research or litigation or transactional purposes, right? And then we see additional skills coming soon. Okay, so again, the same tools, Westlaw is highlighting different ways to use them. So let's go to AI-assisted research, which is going to take us to where we would enter our query. I'm going to ask the same question that we asked on Lex's. How does Florida define residency for tax purposes? And you can see that I have already specified my jurisdiction before I enter my query. And again, it may take some time in order for these responses to be generated, okay? But as you'll see, it will produce various types of sources for you. So it might point you to cases, to pieces of statutory law, to various secondary sources, etc. Okay. So we also talked about the summarization tool and how that expands beyond just case law on Westlaw. I also want to point to these links. So how AI works, right? Giving you some information on the tool. There's even a link to court rules and orders, which is really neat. So now you can browse court rules. How are various jurisdictions dealing with the use of AI? There's also a link to those prompt engineering tips that we saw, right? Okay, and then we can go to summarize document, right? So we could ask it to summarize case law or other documentation, right? We could ask it to draft a particular type of documentation for us. So I'm going to click draft. It will initially give you this. Could you briefly explain how to get started with the draft skill? Okay. No, I want to ask it to draft an email to opposing counsel requesting the production of discovery documents. And let's just see what it looks like, okay? So it's going to take a minute. Again, these are not super swift tools, okay? So we'll wait for the response. Okay, so here's your example to opposing counsel, right? So this might be a starting point. Again, you'd want to review this, right? We believe these documents are essential for the fair and efficient resolution of the matter at hand. Does it make sense to send that to opposing counsel? Does the opposing counsel recognize that these documents are essential, right? We don't want to be patronizing, right? So you want to just use that as a starting point again. So if you look to our in-class exercise, we have a hypothetical about Alice Thompson right? She's an employee of XYZ Corporation. She's been working there for 5 years, but she was recently involved in a project that brought success to the organization, right? And then later, tensions escalated when she raised concerns about workplace safety, saying that certain protocols weren't followed, that she felt could jeopardize employee well-being. She later notices a shift in her relationship with management, and then later after that is ultimately terminated. Okay, so XYZ is asserting that she was terminated due to restructuring and cost-cutting measures that were unrelated to the safety concerns that she had expressed, but she believes her termination is a direct result of her whistleblowing activities. So our instructions tell us to use Westlaw and Protégé to ask a relevant legal question based on the factual scenario. Of course, you're going to include relevant details, right? Legal issue, jurisdiction, pertinent client information. Then you're going to review the responses and sources provided by each tool, each of Protégé and co-counsel. And then you're going to ask follow-up prompt questions, right, in order to improve the results and the response that you're getting, right? So, since I don't have a jurisdiction here, I'm going to ask, when does an employee have a wrongful termination claim against their employer? So that is the legal question that I have determined is at issue after review of this hypothetical, right? So I'm going to enter that question, and then it's going to provide a response that may include, again, a whole host of sources, whether secondary sources, primary sources, codified law, case law, right? Any or all of those things, okay? So what still loading, right? But I can ask the same question on Lex's Protégé. So I'm going to ask the same, does the employee have a wrongful termination claim against their employer? I'm going to enter that question. Now we'll go back to Westlaw. Oh, still working. Lex's is working as well, right? So again, these tools can take some time. What you're going to do, again, for the in-class exercise is to review the responses that are generated. Ask yourself whether the prompt that you entered was an effective prompt. Ask yourself how you could improve that prompt with follow-up questions, right? What are your general impressions of the tools, strengths, weaknesses, right? Are these tools pointing you to the same sources, right? You can see it's still working, right? So again, as I've said multiple times over, it can definitely take some time. But is it giving you the same sources? Ask yourself which is more helpful. Is Protégé more helpful to you? Is co-counsel more helpful? What are the differences, right? Your follow-up questions, were they effective follow-up questions, right? How could you improve those follow-up questions? Okay, so these are subjective, right? The response is going to depend on the prompt that you entered, right? And so again, the response that you're getting is only going to be as strong as the prompt that you've entered, okay? But again, you can use follow-up questions in order to provide more context and yield a more effective, more on-point response for your question, okay? Usually does not take this long, but it is today. Okay, so as I said, it's going to be subjective. There's not a precise right answer for these questions, but it is asking you to kind of get into these platforms, start to use these tools, and start to think about their efficacy. Are they helpful, right? Are they accurate? Would you feel comfortable using these in practice, etc., etc.? The questions that you'll find on the final assessment are going to mirror these questions that you see on the in-class exercise, okay? So you can expect to see the same types of questions. Before we go, I'd like to once more highlight our Excellence in Legal Research program. It's our voluntary online program. You can, again, do it on your own time from wherever you like. And you've got until you graduate, right? So you've got plenty of time. It's really just 10 courses to complete over the course of your law school education. But we've got one focused on emerging legal research technologies, which includes AI, if you want to build on some of the things we've talked about today. But again, I encourage you to pursue our Excellence in Legal Research program. It's a great thing to have on your resume, to have that certificate when you graduate. And then we also, again, if you complete the course or the program, you will be entered into a drawing for $1,500 towards the bar prep company of your choice. If you look to our main law library website, scroll down to quick links, and you'll see Excellence in Legal Research program. You can find more information about the program there, as well as you could follow this link at top to get to the same page and information. As always, if you have questions, we are available in a myriad number of ways, so please don't hesitate to reach out via phone, email, chat, right, whatever it is. Pop by the law library, ask for a research librarian. We're happy to help. I have really enjoyed working with y'all over the course of this academic year, so thank you. I hope it's been helpful. I hope to see some of you in our upper level research classes during 2L and 3L. And again, please reach out at any time if you have questions or need help with a research project. Thanks so much again. Bye-bye.